Hello, Geoff.
Hey Mike, how are you?
Good. Another busy week in BC politics. What's
No
new, right?
kidding. What's
Continuing
not
turmoil,
everything? Crazy.
more upheaval. I mean, you'd think we'd have enough turmoil and upheaval to talk about with the NDP, with the NDP and what's going on in government, but the conservative opposition tends to one-up them on a
Yeah,
regular basis. We're going to talk a bit about that today in the strategy suite. David Eby did get a bit of a tongue lashing in front of developers last week. Still a bit more fallout from Trump tariffs. Prime Minister's down there today. Some forestry fallout. The legislature's back, so that's something to talk about for a 6 week
surrounded by
fall
angry
session.
workers. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of you know divots in the grass from all the union workers marching around. So that's all coming up in Strategy Suite, where we'll be joined by Maria Dobrinskaya, former BC director of the Broadbent Institute, and we expect to have a lively conversation there. But first, we're going to look at our not so long ago political history. The remarkable career of Premier John Horgan, whose personal memoir, John Horgan in His Own Words, is being formally launched, I believe, tonight at an event in
Hmm.
Victoria.
That's right.
Just a year ago, British Columbians learned that Mr. Horgan, then Canada's ambassador to Germany, was near death as a result of his third bout of cancer. He returned to Victoria at the end of October, just as British Columbians voted in what turned out to be a cliffhanger election. Horgan died November 12th, 2024, surrounded by family and friends, and his funeral in December was attended by a packed crowd in Langford. What few knew at the time was that John Horgan had been working on a book, a project undertaken after he left the Premier's office. That book, written with veteran journalist and author Rod Mickleburgh, who's here with us today, has been trickling into bookstores for the past month and is already topping the bestseller list. Now, Rod and this other fellow, Jeff Meigs, wrote a book uh, previously called Art of the Impossible on the Dave Barrett Years, which is an excellent read as well. Recommend that to everyone. So we're delighted to welcome Rod as our guest today to hear more about this book and and the words of John Horgan in his own words. Rod, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Mike, thank you. Long time no see.
Yeah,
I
well,
used to be a scribe.
for those who don't know, who should know but don't know about Rod, you were a longtime Globe and Mail reporter. I think you were CBC as well, were you not?
The dark years, 4 years in TV.
Yeah, 4 years in TV. You had a
I
face
was
for
not a
radio.
success.
Yeah,
And the
I wasn't a
Sun.
Richard Zussman or a Keith
yeah.
Baldry.
Well,
It's
you
a long
found your
list
way
of
into
outfits you worked for.
you found your way
Penticton and
into writing
Herald.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you've written other books too, haven't you? Other than the Barrett book and
Well,
this book?
my first book, if I can call it that, what was it was also kind of oral history. It was interviews with veterans of the Second World War, called Rare Courage, and it was just such a privilege to talk to these veterans and to put their words into a book. And then Geoff and I did the book, which was also number one on the BC bestseller list and won the BC Book Prize. He boasted, but and then I was commissioned to write a history of the BC labor movement, and I was in Monroe's books yesterday, and they were actually had a copy still for sale. It's called On the Line. I signed a copy, so they were able to put autographed by author on the front. So maybe that'll sell.
Okay.
And now, and
Likely
now,
cause a stampede down Government
get it
Street.
early. It's kind of a heavy book, but by weight. And now this just fell into my lap. This amazing experience with John Horgan to be part of his oral memoir.
Well, tell us about the process of putting together this book, John Horgan's kind of final words. How did that come together? How did it work?
Well, it came together. A literary agent, John Pierce, who'd been around for a while. When John stepped down, he approached John, said, "Are you interested in a book?" And John didn't say no, and it was sort of floating around in the back of his mind. And so somehow, and Geoff may even know more about this than I do. It was thought there had to be. John was interested in his career and talking about his legacy, and he had thoughts on politics. So he was interested in leaving something behind and saying something. And what evolved, first of all, was a 2 days, two full days of interviews at Royal Roads University that were recorded, taped on, recorded visually too. And I was on his time as premier on the substantive issues, Site C and LNG and COVID and all the things that happened during those quite tumultuous 5 years. And I was chosen to do those interviews. And I approached them as a journalist. I did a lot of homework and I pressed him on the issues. And if I thought he was being a bit self-serving and political, I might go after him a bit on that. And but they went very, very well. There was lots of stuff there. John was perhaps more candid than I might have expected him to be, very straightforward. And so we were happy with the way those had gone. And then in fact,
I think Rod, it's like in his own mind, these were just being put in the vault for future consideration because there wasn't a book contract. He had Carol James there to prompt him and help him through some of the stories. Sheena McConnell also, who was his press secretary for many years. So it was a wide-ranging discussion, but really sort of almost off the record at that stage.
Guests, last week we talked about presenting sponsor TELUS's brand new facility in Rimouski, Quebec, the first sovereign AI factory in Canada. Now, let's dig into what sovereign AI really means and why it matters to Canadians. When companies use hardware that is not fully Canadian controlled, that data could become subject to foreign laws. That's why keeping Canadian data safe and secure requires investment into Canada's own AI sector. Until recently, Canadian industry looking to implement AI solutions had no other option but to lean on foreign technology. But now, TELUS is proud to provide Canadians with a fully sovereign AI alternative. At TELUS's new AI facility in Rimouski, all computing infrastructure, data processing, and operations are operated and controlled by TELUS within Canada, meaning that all data remains under Canadian laws and regulations. This added layer of digital insurance, a Canadian shield, if you will, is the kind of assurance industries are looking for. Sectors handling sensitive information such as banking and healthcare can rest assured knowing that foreign entities have zero control over Canadian data and TELUS's sovereign AI facility. So, to wrap it all up, AI sovereignty means that Canadian data stays secure, protected, and under Canadian control, thanks to TELUS's commitment to investing in AI innovation here at home.
He talked about, well, maybe future historians, I don't know what they'll make of this. It was left kind of a bit vague, but they were good interviews. And then if to give you guys a plug, he did a very stimulating, terrific podcast with Hotel Pacifico.
Right.
And he was really in good form. It was an engrossing hour, however long it was. And so we took part of the Royal Roads transcripts and part of what he said on Hotel Pacifico, because he was so straightforward, and put them into a book proposal saying, look, and John was interested, look what we got here. And we went to Howard White of Harbor Publishing, and he said, okay, this looks good. And the contract was signed. So then we had a book deal. And but that was just the start of things. There was all his personal life, his early life in politics, his time in opposition, which he hated. 12 years in opposition, opposite the BC Liberals. And
opposition sucks, let's face it.
Boy, did he ever say opposition sucked. He said it, he called it soul destroying. When your best day is maybe throwing rocks at the government and getting above the fold in a story. Meanwhile, you can't do anything. And he was very frustrated for his own writing because he loved his constituents. He wanted to do things for them. And, when you're an opposition MLA, the money doesn't flow towards you from the government. Anyway, and so by then he was the ambassador to Germany, appointed by Justin Trudeau. And so we started filling in the blanks, and we did those over Zoom from the embassy in what is Diggs in Berlin, and they went well. I mean, talking to John about his early life, he loved talking about his early life. He loved the anecdotes. He loved the stories. It was like a couple of bros having a beer on a summer night on a patio. I mean, we really bonded. It was really terrific. And then the news came that he'd been diagnosed with cancer a third time. And I got an email that said he called them, our gab sessions have to come to a halt while he sought treatment. And it was tough treatment. He was in critical care for quite a while. And then surprisingly, about 2 months later, I mean, I think by this time he really wanted this book to be done. He wanted to finish it. he felt this urgency. I got an email from him saying they'd fixed him up with a machine in his throat tubes and or so on, so he could talk. And he said, "I don't sound like Stephen Hawking." And so we actually continued with because there were still some areas to cover. And he was sitting up in his hospital bed in Berlin, and we did
Hmm.
sessions, and they were fine. His voice was a bit hoarse. We cut them short a bit. He said, "We can't talk too much about sports," which we both loved. He said, "Okay, a bit about sports." And remarkably, we did four more sessions. In fact, the last session was just about a year ago today.
Oh,
The book was complete. Then he got the devastating news that the cancer had spread. There was really not much hope, and we know what happened. But I mean,
so
it's
he
kind of a
was doing
miracle
these
that
interviews pretty much right up till his death, about a month
Yeah.
and a half before his death,
pretty
roughly.
much. And as I say, the remarkable thing is that it was complete. There wasn't much else to cover, and so the hands of the gods maybe were with us to some extent. And then it was up to me to put it all together.
Right.
Well,
And
Rod, can I just read you a clip here from a review because it's a good bouncing off point to a few questions we wanted to go through. So it's from Kirk LaPointe of Business in Vancouver, and and he wrote, "I feel as though I have finally had that beer I wanted to have with John Horgan, maybe two or three. It has taken a posthumous book, one long series of tales, trials, and tribulations told in his inimitable voice, for me to at last unhitch any vestige of the performative politician from the very admirable human soul that left us last November." So that was Kirk LaPointe's takeaway, but there's so many stories in the book, and of course, I worked with John, so they're familiar to me. Many's heard them for the first time. But what was Horgan's main reason for writing the book in your mind, or did it change over time?
well, I think for one thing, he liked his life. He liked talking about his life, and he thought there were lessons from his life to be drawn about how you practice politics. You have to be part of a team. Even the guy on the bench is part of the team, and he wanted to be inclusive that way. He also really believed in engaging in people. That was huge with him, and he cared about politics. He cared about being in government and doing things for people. And I think he was also very proud, of course, of the 5 years he was premier and what they achieved for people. All these, I mean, the major things like Site C and LNG and so on, and getting through COVID, but also the things like giving free tuition for people that age out of foster care. That was big for him. He got emotional talking about it, eliminating MSP premiums, these things that he did for people. And he was interested in that legacy. He wasn't, and it wasn't in a self-serving way. He 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 just wanted to do it. I mean, and the more he talked, the more he wanted to do it. As you can see, he we resumed the interviews with him in his hospital bed. So this is something he very much believed in.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I had a chance to read it in advance of the interview, and it's a compelling read. Um, and I agree with Kirk LaPointe that you do kind of feel like he's talking to you. Um, and certainly as like any conversation you have about politics with people, you agree with some stuff, you disagree with other stuff. But I found, as a political backroom guy over the years, some of the anecdotes interesting about how he dealt with victory and defeat, and how I thought to your point earlier, he was very candid, and he certainly made it clear how he felt about political decisions being made around the 2013 election that he disagreed with. Um, and, and some of that was directed at Adrian, who's the leader at the time, which he balances out in the course of the book about with a lot of praise for Adrian as well. But I thought
Adrian
that
Dix. Yeah.
it's Adrian Dix, yeah, and that's a hard thing to do, to be candid about your friends, to be because
They were
sometimes,
best men at each other's weddings. Yeah.
yeah, sometimes we tend to pull our punches to protect people, but I think he had the confidence to be candid, knowing that people he's talking about would take it in stride. But did that surprise you, his level of candor
Well,
in those interviews?
it did. I have to be, so many political memoirs, as Von Palmer pointed out, are these self-serving memoirs, and I'm the hero and settling old scores and things like
Yeah.
that. But I don't think in this memoir John was that partisan or that political. He was straightforward, and I was surprised by how candid he was in the podcast with Hotel Pacifico. Not in an outstanding way to make headlines or anything like that, but it was just very straightforward. He didn't beat around the bush. He didn't put on his political hat and say, and gloss over things. I mean, he wanted to tell it straight, and that was the kind of person that British Columbians got to know also. He was himself. They felt he was genuine, and he brought that to to the podcast, to the memoir. In some ways too much. I mean, there's stuff that he said that's not in the book. I'm not revealing any secrets here, because I
Yeah.
didn't have a chance to go back to him and say, John, do you really want this to be in the book? Because print is permanent, right? It's one thing to
Yeah.
say something in a conversation which you believe,
Yeah.
but it's another thing. It's there for all time, and it might hurt people. And so some of those comments were taken out. We'll never know who the people were that he called dickheads. That's not in the book. And David Eby wasn't one of them. And
Okay.
Well, you need an
like that.
appendix
So
for that story.
he just liked to talk, and he just didn't like to bullshit that much. So this is, I think, what makes this memoir so compelling, to use your word, Mike. It's straightforward. It's John Horgan.
Well,
It's
well,
candid.
just to finish off on the kind of politics front, I mean, obviously the 2013 election was, a hard thing to take for those who were expecting to win. And he was pretty candid in his comments about how he felt after the election, including I was surprised to see the discussion of the crossing the floor was on the radar screen. I don't
Mhm.
think he ever, I personally don't think it ever would have happened. But the fact that it was even, 10 years later was still something he was reflecting on, I think just showed the depths of how he felt at the time.
Yeah.
And then I think if the lesson for people in politics is that you can be at your lowest trough and, 4 years hence, you might be on top of the world, like that's politics, that you can be on the top of the castle, king of the castle or queen of the castle, and then you could be defeated
Look
the
at
next day
Kevin
too.
Falcon. Who had
Yeah.
expected that?
When it comes to shipping, the word bunkering might sound like something out of a war movie. In reality, it simply means fueling a ship. And for more than a century, that fuel has been heavy oil or diesel. But there's a better option. LNG, liquefied natural gas, is natural gas cooled until it becomes a liquid. In this form, it's compact enough to fuel large ships. Earlier this year, BC made history. The Silver Nova, a state-of-the-art cruise ship, became the first vessel bunkered with LNG in Vancouver, supplied by FortisBC's Tilbury facility in Delta. FortisBC isn't new to this. Riding on a ferry between Tsawwassen and Victoria, good chance that ferry is running on LNG provided by FortisBC. There are 10 marine vessels that are fueled with LNG, 6 for BC Ferries and 4 with Seaspan. It's part of a growing global shift to lower emission shipping. They've safely completed more than 78,000 LNG bunkering operations for customers here in BC. These examples show what's possible right here in Vancouver. But here's the challenge. Unless Canada builds the infrastructure, we risk falling behind ports in the US or Asia that are already fueling LNG-powered vessels. Without infrastructure to support these larger vessels, Canada could miss out on the economic and environmental benefits of becoming a global LNG fueling hub. The Tilbury facility has an advantage. It produces some of the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world, thanks to hydroelectricity produced in BC. Expanding that capacity would not only support shipping here at home, but it would also put Canada on the map as a leader in the international transition to lower carbon marine fuels. Because shipping isn't just about moving people and goods, it's about moving them responsibly. And the opportunity is at our doorstep. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. So there's that narrative, I think, for people in politics of going through these trials and tribulations is an interesting thing for people to see.
Well,
They
that
talk.
story was a surprise to me, and I spent as much time with John as many others did during the period he was in government. And I agree with you, Mike. I don't think it ever would have happened, but the fact that there was outreach to him and that he thought about it and still wondered, and it underlines Rod's comment about how much he hated opposition. He
Mhm.
was getting another 4-year sentence. But I think, Rod, to go back to some of the issues, the story also kind of underlines how he grew, and he talks about that. I don't think too many people would be that self reflective later in life. It's hard to do to say I was wrong then or my behavior was wrong then and it changed later. And he talks a bit about that in terms of managing the Site C decision or dealing with LNG. And now we just see the LNG Canada project going into a new phase with a second line opening. Tell us a little bit about those debates and how he reflected on those.
Well, I think Site C is very interesting. A huge decision, and as we know, they were in the predicament of Christy Clark, and he hated this about Christy Clark, if I might, Mike, that he felt she was playing politics with a decision as huge as Site C by, as she said bluntly, to pushing it past the point of no return. So no new government could. I mean, she played that card, and it couldn't be rolled back. She hoped. And that really angered Horgan, who was an energy guy and wasn't necessarily opposed to Site C. But he didn't like the fact that the BC Utilities Commission had been bypassed and so on. And so on the hustings, he said, didn't say we're going to kill it. Some of his MLAs that were running and candidates who were running basically said that. He didn't say that. He said, we'll do an independent review. So they squeaked in, and the Greens were sort of fine with that, even though they were very opposed to Site C. They got in, they held the independent review by the BC Utilities Commission. And what happened was that the BC Utilities Commission didn't come down with a recommendation. They said, here's all the information. Here are the implications if you kill it. Here are the implications if you go ahead. And the implications of killing it were momentous. I mean, Christy Clark succeeded. She did push it past the point of no return. And so he felt, okay, I don't want to make this decision on my own. He brought the whole caucus along. He brought in experts to talk to the caucus. He swore them in so everyone, it was done confidentially. And the caucus could ask all the questions they wanted, and they would be provided with information. They held 3 sessions like that in which everybody in the caucus was involved, and he laid out the implications. And as he says in the book, by the third meeting, the questions were less and less.
Mhm.
And it was figured they really had no, if they really wanted to secure the finances of BC, because there would have been billions of dollars lost by canceling it. Plus, you might get sued. All these things might happen. And they just made the momentous decision to go ahead. But it was an inclusive debate. He didn't just
Mhm.
say, this is what we're going to do. He involved everybody. And so by the time and everybody was given information in the caucus. So by the time they went back to their constituents, they had a lot of information and a lot of and they could explain why this decision was made, because instinctively the NDP base, many NDPers were opposed to Site C. And that was the way he operated, providing people with
Well,
information.
I take solace in in the wrap up of that topic that he definitely said we needed the power. Like
And he did say that.
he
That's absolutely
eventually
right.
got at the end of the narrative. It's like, yeah, we need it. So yeah, and I take it they
He
didn't
was
like
an
the
energy guy.
he
He
didn't
appreciated that. He
yeah he
appreciated the
didn't
need for
maybe
power.
would have preferred to have the more optionality in his decisions, I guess.
That's exactly right.
But both with that and LNG, these were initiatives that NDP are hard for NDP leaders to deal with within their own ranks, right? And managing that debate. I mean, I can sit here and litigate TMX, LNG, and Site C about, what the NDP's position was or how it evolved and all that kind of stuff. But really, I think what it speaks to is how John Horgan had to manage the politics of it. And he managed the politics successfully to get two outcomes that were, in my opinion, the best interests of British Columbians. And he managed to do that while maintaining his grip on the NDP and maintaining harmony within the caucus. And that's no small achievement. The BC Liberals, if we got reelected in 2017, would have just been full steam ahead on these things. But it was a different reality for the NDP in terms of how people feel about these issues. So, I think
Well,
it
and
took a,
he had to deal with the Greens too on LNG, who were
yeah,
Andrew Weaver just about had a fit every time he
uh,
talked about
just
LNG.
just take Andrew Weaver to another rugby game, give him a couple more beers, and everything will be fine.
No, it wasn't like
Uh,
that.
Okay.
But they sat down and negotiated a deal with the LNG people. I mean,
yeah,
Weaver called them subsidies. Horgan didn't like that term. He said we made a deal with them.
yeah,
They'll still have to pay us back in the future, but they
yeah.
deferred the sales tax and all those things. It wasn't a slam dunk that they were going to go
Well, the
ahead.
Greens voted against it,
They
but
did.
the BC Liberals
Yeah.
supported it, so it was like
Yeah.
84-3 or something like that. So that
Yeah,
worked
and
out.
Horgan had sought the leadership saying, I support LNG. No one in the NDP could have any illusions on that score. There were people who were furious about his position on Site C. But you mentioned three big projects, maybe Site C's out of the mix, though, where there was a ton of interaction with the federal government. And I was interested, Rod, how much he landed on his relationship with Justin Trudeau. Why don't you talk about that a bit? Because in spite of the huge battle over TMX and other issues during COVID and so on, he expresses real affection for Trudeau.
They bonded in a way that perhaps is surprising. And one of the reasons John says in the book is that they may have bonded is that he considered Justin Trudeau sort of a British Columbian premier because if he had roots here in British Columbia, with his grandparents out here and his mom from West Vancouver, and they would be out here for holidays and all that sort of thing. And so he felt that he was dealing with somebody that understood British Columbia. Also, Justin Trudeau laughed at his jokes and so on. And also, John was of the view that you don't pick fights with Ottawa. Gordon Campbell was of the same view. He never said anything critical of the federal government because he figured they can do things for us. Why pick a fight?
Hmm.
And so they did kind of bond, and they joked, they got along. It was, and he appointed him to ambassador of Germany. I pressed John on this. I thought he might, because we all know the Liberals and under Justin Trudeau promised big, and then the reality that nothing happened, right? And there were a lot of things that they didn't do for British Columbia, but I couldn't get John to really go after Justin and be critical. He had a fondness for him, and they it was I mean he liked people. I mean, he didn't pick a fight with any premier except Rachel Notley, of all people, the NDP premier of Alberta. He got along with Doug Ford. Scott Moe was at his memorial. I mean, a really
Yeah.
right-wing guy, and they got along. They looked for areas of agreement, and so there was
He
some of that
clicked with Jason Kenney too.
and Jason Kenney, and
Mhm.
there was some of that with Justin, but I who's to figure? I think they just got along and were friendly, and they were glad to see each other when they did meet.
Why are BC public sector workers on strike? It's simple. We can't afford to stay in our jobs without fair wages. I'm a wildfire fighter. I risk my life to keep others safe, but I make just $28 an hour. Half of us are thinking about leaving already, and now government wants us to accept wages below inflation. I can't afford to fall behind.
Tell government to come back to the table with a fair deal before we lose the people who keep BC running. Visit frontlinesfirst.ca. A message from the BC General Employees Union.
So Rod, to quote Harold Macmillan, events, dear boy, events. There were things that he didn't plan for in his premiership, COVID, fentanyl crisis, and the heat dome slash forest fires slash atmospheric river, right? Natural disasters. So, what are your reflections on? I mean, you can break it down or writ large how he approached these unanticipated events.
Well, with COVID, unlike other premiers, he stepped out of the way. He left it to Bonnie Henry, who was their public health officer, and Adrian Dix, the health minister. And as he said, Doug Ford and some of these other ministers had to announce everything, and they were hands-on.
Mm,
And they have these totems at the back of the press conference with masks on. You didn't know who they were. They were all just standing there like that. Well, Doug Ford, who what did he know about COVID? And he was up and down all over the place on COVID. John stayed mostly out of the way, except when it was felt that a major decision was being made, and maybe the province had to be lectured on obeying the restrictions. He'd come in and he said, "Be the dad," and tell people to smarten up. But so he was involved behind the scenes, but he wasn't out front. And, it really worked well because Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix worked well together, and especially during the first phase, BC knocked it out of the park. But of course, it came out of the blue. And I thought he handled it very, very well. What are you going to do about the other things like the heat dome or the atmospheric river? I mean, again, they just came out of the blue. He said, "How many times can I use the word unprecedented? These things had never happened before. You can't be prepared for them." And he made a misstep when during the heat dome when the people asked him about the deaths. He said, "Well, some people die, and it was a very unfortunate remark and the way he termed it." And he says, "I'll regret that to the end of my days." And they just had to take it on and ride with it. But it took a toll. Plus, then he was diagnosed with cancer, throat cancer. And he just found that he had less and less energy to deal with these issues, and they just seemed to be accumulating. Plus, he was fighting a very serious cancer. And that's when he started to think, maybe my time is up here. I call it in the book the annus horribilis. Is it 2021? When all these things piled on top of him, plus the opioid crisis was ongoing with no solution in sight. It was getting worse and worse. The good times weren't there anymore, if I can put it that way. The easy decisions, not easy, but straightforward decisions.
And this
They
might
were
be
difficult.
a question for Geoff as much as you, Rod, he received the cancer diagnosis, was that late 2021?
I think so, yeah.
So that first half of 2022 was when he was really battling with his treatment, right? So
Yeah, especially the first, he had, I don't want to get the number wrong, but it was around 30 radiation treatments in pretty close succession, week after week after week, and was very, very weak at the end. It took quite a while to recover. And worst of all, for a politician, he lost his voice. It was very difficult for him to speak for a while. And even more aggravating, he lost his taste. He had dry mouth. All of the things that cancer patients are familiar with, but very difficult to manage when you're in public life.
Geoff, I mean, in so much as you want to reveal it, what are your reflections during that time of how, as chief of staff, how you had to support him through that? Because that must have been a huge challenge for you.
Well, it was hard for all of us because he had a couple of days a week where he was more in a position to give us direction and listen to briefings and stuff, and other days of the week when he was simply in treatment and couldn't do it or recuperating. But by that time, I think the whole team had found a rhythm with John that made it easier for us to work together. I mean, we never had much friction, but there was a high degree of confidence and mutual understanding and friendship and so on. So we could produce stuff for him in a very, focused way and know that we were hearing him properly. But a lot of it was his confidence in the public service. Rod hasn't mentioned this, but he had a huge respect for the public service, which was reciprocated, even when he might have been frustrated by some of the recommendations or the time this stuff took. He was very, very positive about the public service and saw that as a relationship. And I would say, and you know this too, Mike, if the public service is feeling good about how you feel about them, productivity rises. And so no one in the
That's
public
something that
service
the federal Liberals never figured out under Justin Trudeau. Their productivity among the civil service was close to zero. Sorry, Geoff, keep going.
Yeah, well, so it was, and also you've mentioned a number of issues, Mike, that were there was a way to handle them, except for the fentanyl crisis. I think it might be worth spending just a moment on that, Rod, because he clearly, among the list of things that he wished to do something on, he was not successful. He didn't feel the government was as successful as he wished on the fentanyl crisis. And maybe just speak about that a bit, because he took the blame himself, but the issue lay deeper, I think.
Yeah, he was very emotional about that issue. I was surprised when I raised it with him that he was, in anger spilled out too. He was just very, very frustrated at their inability to make any inroads. And one of the things that really bugged them, they were trying to do all these things. Everybody had advice. It was very hard to steer your way through. And every month the coroner would release how many people had died of fentanyl overdoses, and the media would break up. They'd be in the house, and then people would say nothing more until the next month. But it never, it was there, and they had to say how concerned they were, and the toll was always high. It was sort of a no-win situation for the government, no matter what they were doing. Not much made a difference, and he soured a bit on harm reduction and safe supply. He still supported it, but he could see that it wasn't working, and nobody really figured out the best way to do that. Everybody had a different idea. Oh, give free drugs to everybody whenever they wanted it, or it has to be done this way. And it just, and he also was frustrated by the fact he created a separate ministry. The first time in Canada, there was a separate ministry for mental health and addiction. That was Judy Darcy. And he felt mental health got forgotten because all the headlines and the tragedies, let's be clear, of the opioid crisis. And he wanted more done for mental health, but he felt it got hijacked to some extent by the opioid crisis. And by the end, as he admits, nothing we did seemed to make a real difference. And he was frustrated about that. He was angry about that because he had compassion for all these people, but he just tired of all the viewpoints and the safe supply people that wanted vending machines selling crack pipes, that kind of thing. And decriminalization. That was do decriminalization. That's going to solve so many problems. It didn't solve any problems, and it almost made the situation worse because it led to this really increased use of drugs in public, which really sparked a backlash. And he said, as a matter of fact, Justin Trudeau, who was loath and reluctant to bring in decriminalization, was right, and that it was a failure. So when he looked back, there was one area where he was very frustrated, and as I say, even angry that there were so few positive results in that very difficult, complex issue.
Rod,
I
what do
just
you
want
think?
to say before
Sorry,
you move on, Mike, well,
yeah.
just for those who are interested in that issue, we now have Horgan's memoir and we have Judy Darcy's memoir, which
Yeah.
I interviewed Judy a few weeks ago on Hotel Pacifico. And they're not different accounts, but they're the first person accounts we have from insiders of their feelings about the thing. And I encourage anybody who's interested in that whole topic to take a look at both of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Rod, summing it up, what do you think is the message in this book that John Horgan's conveying to his fellow New Democrats?
Well, I think I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm just wondering, he has a message, and one of the things is you succeed by building relationships, and you succeed by engaging with people. You don't just stand at the podium and hand down dictates and create political zingers against your opponents and so on. You have to do it sort of one step at a time. It's the relationships you build that pay off at the end, and you have to be straightforward with people. And so, I mean, these don't sound like huge things, but he believed in them implicitly, and they worked for him. How many people said, I don't like the NDP, but I like John Horgan because they could sense he was straightforward and he was genuine. But I've been thinking, things have changed. This was all pre-tariff, right? This was all pre the increased extremist partisanship that's going on now, and even more rampant use of social media. It almost feels like looking back at a different time. And I don't want to say it's not relevant because, of course, it's relevant and it worked for John. And he's such a genuine person and compelling in the way he describes how he practiced politics. He also reached out to people he disagreed with. He believed in that. He just didn't hammer them all the time. You could look for ways of agreeing with people. And he was serious with it. He also thought the federal NDP had lost its way. You got to build stuff. You can't just be against everything. And he also believed you can't just be outside the building yelling. If you want to affect change, you have to be inside the building doing things. He'd been at protests. He'd yelled at the building. That's not the way he saw change coming. And I think those were things he believed in and wanted to tell people about. whether that's even possible now, because so much has changed in the last couple of years. It's really a little disconcerting. There was no
Well,
Donald Trump and tariffs in those days. Well, there was early on with just softwood, but that seems
yeah.
like nothing compared to the situation now.
Well, Rod, good luck with the launch.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming in to tell us about John Horgan in his own words, available in bookstores
And
now.
lots of good stories. It's not just about politics.
Yeah.
Published by
Yeah.
Harvard Publishing, one of the great publishers in British Columbia. So good luck, and thanks for stopping by Hotel Pacifico.
I really
Thanks,
enjoyed
Rod.
it. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Geoff.
Every morning in my house, someone's reaching for the milk. Splash my coffee before I head out the door. And here's the thing, that milk was produced just a few days ago right here in Canada. It didn't cross a border. It didn't sit in a foreign warehouse for weeks. It's local, it's fresh, and it's reliable. That's because Canada's supply management system matches what farmers produce to what families actually need. So there's always enough dairy to go around without shortages. That's food sovereignty in action, making sure our most essential foods are produced close to home by farmers we know and trust. Supply management is the power to feed ourselves with our own resources without depending on foreign governments or unpredictable trade decisions. In a world where supply chains can shift overnight, that's something worth protecting. Supply management delivers for BC families. A message from BC Dairy.
Well, Geoff, that was an interesting interview with Rod.
Yeah, well, of course, Rod and I are old friends, but he's done an outstanding job with this book. It was a ton of material and a lot of craft put into making it sound so close to John's actual words, which are what they are, his actual words.
I remember meeting Jeff Meigs for I think the first time in a Milestones on Canby, where I brought my Art of the Impossible book for you to get to autograph it. I
Yep.
fanboyed you. So, and then you wrote in the book, this was around 2015, I think, and you
Yeah,
wrote in
probably.
it's our turn, so
Which it was.
which I did not acknowledge at the time. Hey, before we bring on our formally introduce our very talented Strategy Suite guest, we just have a little administration to do here. We have a few listener comments. JW wrote, I was in the audience for Ms. Lowen's speech at UBCM and left thoroughly impressed. That's in response, I think, to my somewhat uncharitable comments about new Green leader Emily Lowen's speech to UBCM, which I felt was maybe not the most realistic policy speech I'd ever heard. But JW, who was there at UBCM, I believe was a counselor up north, disagreed. So there you go, JW, you've been heard.
Mhm.
And then there's BB. When are you two, I think he's referring to me and you, Geoff,
I
when
think
are
so,
you
yeah.
two going to replace Kate? I would prefer someone younger and better looking than either of you, and not totally infatuated with ancient BC political history. I've lived too much of it to want to reminisce.
I think it's a fair comment. I think it's a
Zoiks.
fair comment.
Well, BB,
We're going to have to prioritize.
get used to some more ancient BC political history now. That's all I can say. I mean, not that old either, by the way.
No.
Anyways,
Well, you are, and you're good looking, Mike, I have to say.
well, thank you, Geoff. Um, But for listeners who are wondering what we're doing about Kate, we are planning to invite a lot of people through the Strategy Suite over the next few months. And today we have very talented Maria Dobrinskaya, who's joining us. Maria, former director of the Broadbent Institute, and many other things in your talented career. Maria, welcome
Mhm.
to Hotel Pacifico.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
And we're
I also
also
like ancient BC history, but few years younger than you guys. So
also like to welcome Pearl, the cat.
oh yes, my cat. Cats are allowed on the podcast. I
We are pro
understand.
cat, definitely pro
Mhm.
cat. Pearl's. Oh, look, Pearl. Oh, for
She's stretching. She's
watch on
stretching.
you watch on YouTube, folks. You're going to get some good Pearl action. So, lots to talk about this week. Let's just start with BC and Alberta. Daniel Smith is advancing a new pipeline idea from Alberta to Tidewater, somewhere maybe near Prince Rupert. Premier Eby not too keen on that. What do you make of it, Maria?
Um, Well, here we are again. Just listening in on your guys' conversation with Rod, I kind of chuckled at the comment that the only person that Morgan picked a fight with in his time was Premier Notley, and I think that given the support of British Columbians at that point and the support of New Democrats. In that particular kerfuffle with a province and a premier that I think New Democrats by and large were very, very supportive in terms of Rachel Notley and wanting the Alberta New Democrats to be successful. I think Eby is doing what he needs to do as the premier of the province. I think his message is actually pretty good. I don't know how, I think it's time limited, but right now, being really clear on the fiction, he's really emphasizing the fictional aspects, using that word in particular, around this proposal, and that it's not like zero sum. It's not just we don't want, to Rod's point around the Democrats need to build stuff and need to be in support of projects, not just saying no. Eby's not saying no pipeline. He's saying we have all these other things on the go that are actually going to be compromised by this pipeline. But I also still think it's like it is a bit of a. I mean, Danielle Smith is also very effective as a communicator and as a politician, and she's clearly speaking for her province and the pipeline politics there. But ultimately, it's going to come to Carney's lap, and it's curious how much of this is constructed, where this is going to go. I think that the big conversation that, where it will land and where I'm sort of curious is it's ultimately about the tanker ban. We could talk a lot about the pipeline. I think we've seen support for pipeline in various formations from British Columbians. I'm not sure what the polling looks like now, but my recollection from the last go round of this is that even when support was mixed on the pipeline, when you start talking about the coast and protecting the coast and the risks of bitumen travel and tanker traffic in the coast, the support for protecting the coast is quite high. That may have changed. As we've spoken about, as Rod mentioned, the economy is very different. The political situation is very different. But that tanker ban came in as a result of the coastal First Nations going to court. And so even if there's political decisions from Carney, which would be fraught and, again, not zero sum, there'd be a lot of somebody's going to be a loser here, no matter what he picks and how he manages to do that well. Staying Team Canada will be tricky. But there's a legal case, it won't be expedited regardless. There will likely to be legal challenges. And I think ultimately this is a piece of what I kind of saw was coming. There was a lot of elbows up rhetoric a few months ago for very good reasons. Canadians really united in a sort of pro-Canada, anti-Trump nationalism. But it was very undefined. What that meant for people was quite different depending on who you were talking to and what part of the country they were in. So now it's push come to
The
shove.
context
What does
is
elbows
different
up
now,
mean,
though.
right?
I mean, the context is different.
Totally, but I'm saying what elbows up, what a pro-Canada stance means to somebody in the Alberta oil sands versus to somebody on the coast, or to the relationships with First Nations, or the relationships of all the provinces with each other, with the federal government. That is the substance of nationalism in this country, and it's a lot harder, I guess, is what I'm saying, to navigate than just saying elbows up, we're all on Team Canada.
Well, every province has a plan until it gets punched in the face, right? And
Yeah.
and at a $14 billion deficit and uncertain economic outlook, I mean, I think that's you mentioned public opinion. I think public opinion actually a majority probably support an oil pipeline. It's just
At the
with
risk
it.
of the risk of some of these LNG projects, like I guess part of
Yeah.
it is that we'll need to sort of tease out more fully what are the risks, right? Like Evie's putting up that frame, and politically, I think it's a good frame for him to create around this conversation, that it's not just about this pipeline or not. It's about the LNG project. It's about the relationship with First Nations. It's about the coast and the other ongoing economic development, the mining. How all of these at risk? Is that real? What does that mean? How much social license are we losing on these other projects if this pipeline goes ahead? Because I don't think it's just, are you for a pipeline or not? And that's a bit, that's what Danielle Smith is trying to frame up. for her purposes. And I think Evie's correct to say, actually, it's more, this is BC's economy that we're talking about, because that's what you're saying, Mike, is this is BC's economy. So is the pipeline a net gain,
Yeah,
or
but
what,
I
what are
think
we
you're
looking
making
at?
an important point, Maria, and I wondered whether tactically the premier made an error by saying there is no pipeline, there's no proponent, and Daniel Smith, of course, is able to fix that problem quite quickly
Yeah,
and say, okay, I'll be the
yeah.
proponent, I'll do the study, we'll pick the route. That doesn't mean anything's going to happen very soon. There'll be no shovels in the ground, as we say, for years on this thing. He also could have said, well, if it's about expansion of bitumen exports, I've got this solution over here, which is to fill up the current pipeline. We're going to deepen Second Narrows. We're prepared to talk about other stuff. We've had unit trains of bitumen. I'm not keen on it, but it doesn't get into the tanker ban problem. But the conversation was, there is no pipeline, therefore I don't want to answer. And she said, oh, no, there's certainly a proponent here. And I agree, he's been adding in these other things, which LNG Canada and so on. But she's using this to take Canada hostage, really, to say, if you disagree with this, then I'm going to have to take a look at separatism. And there's a whole set of Alberta politics that are playing in this that are hard to manage.
Well, I mean, the separatism debate is live in Alberta, and it's certainly live within the UCP. So whether or not she activates it on her own end, she has to deal with it. And the emblematic issue of it is market access for oil. So,
But is that satisfied by this pipeline? I mean, we saw a version of this 5 years ago with Trans Mountain as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what's the next thing, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I
yes, I don't
just,
think Albertans have fully shown their gratitude for TMX.
I don't, I'm just saying there'll be, it's not, that was the one that we need, access to Tidewater. But I also think that it's not, I'm sort of speaking to the sort of the lack of, there's a certain element in Alberta politics that's not going to be satisfied. I mean, I think that's true for BC as well. Jason Kenney couldn't manage. Jason Kenney couldn't manage it. And he's not he's a right-wing conservative guy. And so, I think Daniel Smith is walking this line. But I'm just saying, I don't know that even this project or Mark Carney, I'm not sure what the federal government, any offer from the federal government is going to satisfy the Alberta separatist sentiment.
Well, the Carney position seems to be, we want this Pathways project, which is a carbon capture and storage project. And I wonder how serious they are about that, because I don't think that technology is ready or viable. Is Carney going to say you have to have the Pathways project in place? It's really down to Carney and how seriously he takes David Eby's concerns on this front. And I think we're going to find out. I mean, quite soon.
But also the tanker ban, like, even with the carbon capture, like, I still come back to this tanker ban and the legal challenges that will inevitably come up, regardless of what the federal government does. Like,
well, first of all, I mean, I think the real big decision ahead on this issue is, what is the federal government going to do? Because it's obviously Alberta wants it, BC doesn't want it, but the federal government, if it really leans into it, as they've been signaling, frankly, then that's really going to, be a polarizing effect for Carney in terms of how people perceive him, right? And like, it also raises the issue, like I think you're alluding to, Maria, like on legal challenges. Let's just assume, just on the Indigenous context here, because certainly Chief Marilyn Slett and Haida and others have come out strongly against it. Is that in fact a veto? Like, can they stop development, or are these rights subject to the national interest? And that this issue may test all of that. That may test it in the courts. We don't know yet.
Which will all take a long time as well, right? Like, so even I imagine that it will be tested in the courts. Depending on what the federal government does. None of this is happening quickly, I guess, even though the politics are urgent.
Okay, well, we'll definitely be tracking this one. Let's move on to a different type of controversy. This past week at UDI lunch, the annual Bob Rennie
Urban Development Institute or developers.
The Bob Rennie interview with Premier Eby. Wasn't able to make it, but Geoff, you picked up some tweets, I think, on the event. Were you there, Geoff?
Most of the no, I didn't go. Most of the coverage, though, and I heard it was pretty reliable. Was certainly Jordan Bateman was on it, but others said much the same. Was that he was introduced? The premier was introduced by Rick Illich, who's owner, CEO of Townline Developments. He's a respected developer. He's chair of the UDI this year, so he's sort of the spokesperson. His outfit has built 4,000 homes. He knows what he's talking about on the development front. He took the chance while introducing David Eby to roast him politically, saying something is broken in the province. According to Bateman and others agreed with him, it was an absolute shredding of the government. He continued with a denunciation of healthcare as deplorable, pointed to the hollowed out city centers due to crime and drug use, and even attacked the premier on FOI changes. I heard that the premier kind of recovered pretty well in the subsequent back and forth he had with Bob Rennie, but I just wonder how representative Illich is, and how deep this anger is at the government. Did you pick up anything on this one, Maria?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to somebody who was there, whose politics veer more towards mine, and said that I'll just back up just 1 second. Again, quote Rod, quoting Horgan, talking about, the importance of being in the room with people and connecting with people and building relationships. So I think Eby being there is important, and obviously housing is, but he has a long-term relationship with the industry. Yeah, he was housing minister prior to being premier, and and this government and this and previous one have done a lot for the industry in terms of that we didn't see from the BC Liberals, that I think people have been pleased with, but it's without question a hard time for the industry. I think that what I heard was that he's a lawyer. He's good in rooms like that where he has time. He's very wonky. He knows the file, and he has time to sort of talk through what the government's doing, hearing the complaints, and and I think in keeping it to housing, I think other than the Bateman tweet, the only sort of news reported out from that meeting was Rennie's call for a real estate czar.
There's a lot of czars,
Yeah.
an outbreak of czars lately.
I have opinions about calling everything czars. But I think that there was, my understanding from what I heard was that that Eby recovered, and I don't know how representative it is. Illich represents it, and he's the head of an industry organization, and I think that probably a lot of people are frustrated. How much of that is directly related to things within Eby's control or outside of Eby's control? I don't know, but it's not particular to the real estate industry either, right? So Eby's got a lot of people mad at him on a lot of fronts, and I think that because I also heard from somebody else, like, why would he be in that room? But I personally think it's good that he's in that room, regardless of what people are saying. And I suspect that him being able to kind of listen to that and recover and sort of be able to speak to the substance of what the government is doing is really important. Because I do think that's, Eby has the sort of comical side, he has that accessible side where he can kind of tell jokes, but I think that, he's a lawyer. He's used to, if he has half an hour to tell you the ins and outs of the policies of a particular file, particularly one like housing that he has an interest in, I think he does really well on that front. So
But I agree with that, but I think that it's a sign of problems to come, because historically,
absolutely,
the UDI has always been very, very partisan. You may disagree, Mike, but generally speaking, the UDI could be counted on to support the BC Liberals vocally, and
well, what
without
I
doubt.
say,
But
yeah. I
the
mean, this
thing
might
is
be
here is
something
that-
better. Go, sorry, go ahead.
Well,
They
a year
seem
ago-
they seem to be a fan of Vision Vancouver back in the day, Geoff.
Yeah, no, well, we had that relationship that Maria talks about, but I think even a year ago, John Stovall, the previous chair, was saying he really couldn't think of anything to criticize the NDP about, because most of the policy prescriptions have been adopted, and these the province-wide rules brought in by the NDP were much appreciated by But the new feature here is that we're finally seeing confirmation from CMHC that the housing sector, which is 30% of the economy in terms of GDP, is in a coma. and there's thousands of unsold units and more layoffs, and it's looking like there will be a cascade of decisions not to commence construction on units. So this is going to be a fraught relationship, and I think in some respects, Rick Illich is just demonstrating how the sector is frustrated and lashing out
So
at
isn't
the
this an
government
example
generally.
though of be careful what you wish for? Because, the government has taken steps in the name of housing affordability in terms of spec tax and vacancy taxes and things like, and the federal government's restricted foreign ownership of real estate, and it's suppressed prices and demand, and housing arguably is becoming more affordable as a result, and developers are out of work and
Mhm.
construction workers are out of work. So, it's like, what do you want? Do you want housing? You want more affordable housing?
Well,
Then,
but the solution, both federally and provincially here in BC, is for the government to step in, re-enter the market to do
yeah,
affordable housing because it's not
yeah.
profitable. And the industry is very annoyed about that too. And I think some of the people who are most angry about it wasn't Rick Illich, were part of the group that dumped Kevin Falcon to bring in John Rustad, which
Well,
may be a decision they regret now.
well,
I don't know.
this is what I was just going to say. Is I mean, we could talk about the sort of policy reasons for this, but the political solutions are also not there. I mean, Kevin Falcon was their guy, and I mean, I think you're right, Geoff, that this is the group that has historically not been sort of pro NDP, but in the absence of, are they, what is there behind the scenes organizing to fix the Conservatives, to create an alternative to David Eby? And I'm not, I don't know, I'm not in that scene at all. But as I know we're going to talk about, like, in some ways, their best bets right now are to yell at David Eby and to hope that there is opportunity for productive conversations there, because I'm not sure, what we're seeing on the other side of the house is going to bring them what they want either.
Well, let's talk about the Conservatives. I mean, we're in
Is
the
John
first
Rustad still leader? I haven't checked my
first
X
week of the
feed.
fall sitting.
As
Yeah.
of last night, but who knows what happened? Hey.
So yeah, when all the focus should be on the government's record, coming off the last quarterly report, all eyes on the Conservative caucus again, 1 week after Eleanor Sturco, or was it 1 week or 2 weeks after Eleanor Sturco left? Um, uh, Penticton MLA Amelia Boltby posts on Sunday night a new profile pic on Twitter of her and Eleanor Sturco. Now, so far, as of the airing of this interview or the recording of this interview, she is still a member of the Conservative caucus, Amelia Boltby, that is. So, drama behind the scenes. And then last week, staff member Lindsay Shepherd, who posted on some comments about Orange Shirt Day and Reconciliation Day, calling it a shirt of lies, was very abruptly told to take her tweet down, and then after some consideration was told to pack up her belongings and leave.
Clear her
She
desk. Yeah.
she recorded her firing uh, and then posted it on Twitter. 500,000 views later, um, she's fomenting pushback to John Rustad from that side of things, the anti-cancel culture crowd, and people like Aaron Gunn and some
And
members of caucus as well.
some very big players were
Uh,
signing on for her tweet.
yeah, and I saw tweets, unless I misinterpreted them, from Harman Bangu um, and David Williams on the Conservative caucus, who seemed to be agreeing that this was the wrong thing to do.
Well, and party
So,
president Asia Esti reposted some of those, particularly Aaron
yeah,
Gunn's.
so there's some internal churn with the Conservatives.
Yeah.
Yes,
Discuss.
there sure is. There sure is. Um, I mean, this is all, I'll just say a couple of things before getting into conservatives. Like, this is all uh, emblematic of sort of larger problem, I think, within, for conservatives within the so-called conservative movement right now, in terms of, uh, and I mean, I mentioned Jason Kenney, like Jason Kenney couldn't really, some of that the same impulses and tensions within amongst conservatives were in different ways, but were tearing apart his leadership. And I think that it's going to be hard to wrangle into something that, Poilievre has managed to do it. I've been interested in how quiet relatively Aaron Gunn has been since becoming a candidate and then he's an MP, right?
MP, yeah. Visited
And
Hotel Pacifico last summer. So
you know, and certainly Rustad is not in a position to keep that together. But as you guys have also well know, things can change really quickly. So, you know, David Eby is benefiting from this, but it's such a, and I think there's a lot of challenges for the Conservatives in sort of inserting the discipline and you know, wanting to govern, frankly, having enough people there that want to govern. To me right now, it does not look like they want to govern. But again, things can change really quickly, and I think there's a lot of people mad at David Eby, as we've been talking about. And it doesn't take a lot for political tides to turn in a hurry. But right now, I mean, you know, we're not even talking about Dallas Brody, thankfully. I mean, I just mentioned her, but she's taken up a lot of oxygen as well. You know, Lindsay Shepherd is somebody who came in, who was the Conservative staffer, who came in with quite a following. You know, is a personality in her own right. And, you know, her and Aaron Gunn and a lot of these folks, like they were at the sort of creation of the BC Conservatives here when Kevin Falcon was still leader of BC United, or maybe they were still even the BC Liberals. So going back to that decision by Kevin Falcon, and particularly the lack of any criteria in handing over the keys, so to speak. You know, I still look back and think, like, why would they not have
well, at
I
that
mean,
point, in the process, I think the electrodes were on his nipples. You know, like
sure, but like, you know, I mean, part of why I'm
I
here
don't
is
think he
because
had a lot of bargaining power.
there
I'll
was
never be able to
no,
unsee that
but
picture.
you know, vetting, right? Like half these people shouldn't be MLAs. Like, and I don't say that based on my own
You know,
politics. I say that based on, like, in a political party
well,
with
hey,
discipline
look,
and structure,
every caucus
there would be a vetting
has some of
process
these people. Maybe
for sure.
more in the
Not half the
Conservatives this time
caucus.
because of the nature in which they were elected, but
Yeah.
there's some
Well,
pretty
but the
there's a
thing here is
cabinet in that caucus, in my opinion.
but they keep losing the so-called disruptive elements like Dallas Brody and her two friends, and then Eleanor
Yeah.
Sturko's out. It is really unbelievable. And if you try to watch the Twitter feed about this at all, or X feed or whatever you call it, it's just mind-bending. It's really like a really terrible high school, you know, hate fest among teenagers in some respects, where people are walking up to each other in restaurants and taping them and then posting it, and it really goes on and on. Rustad is completely got his back to the wall here, as far as I can tell. Just
Yeah.
Hall reported last night that he had said he would quit if enough people asked him to. Well, that they will. Lots of people
Well,
will ask him
they
to.
didn't even allow the vote, I guess, is what happened
Yeah,
last night,
yeah.
as he had enough loyalists to shut down
Well,
the vote
there's
even happening. But that's time limited for sure.
well, if Rustad does in fact leave, there's a fork in the road here for the
Yeah.
Conservatives. Either they grow up and go with leadership, and not just a leader, but a leadership group that is going to chart a course for 45% of the popular vote, or they're going to go to be purists and go with double down on, like, unless you were here at the beginning, you're not welcome type of approach, and that will open up the center.
Well, but I think the insurgent group, Mike, appears to be people like Aaron Gunn, Aisha Essay, Harman Bangu, who are old friends and were there
yeah,
at the birth of the BC Conservatives. And Rustad is a bit of a newcomer to that group, and
yeah.
they clearly were furious at him for
Well, I
firing
wouldn't.
Leslie Shepherd.
You know, I think the art of politics, or the art of the impossible, Jeff, is leadership that can bridge a lot of these divides that exist. And you know, Gordon Campbell was someone who had to do it in the '90s, and it finally made it happen. And Christie was able to navigate that herself, and then it kind of fell apart for the BC Liberals. And the question is, can someone do that today with this configuration, or does it have to be blown to smithereens again? I mean, that's we don't know. It feels like, you know, time is running out on John Rustad, because I mean, who are his people when it comes down to it? If he's getting flack on the right,
On
he's
both
getting
sides
flack from
now.
the
Yeah.
middle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, who's there for you? you know, and I mean, there are some for sure.
Brad Zubik on the staff for sure.
Bruce Banman, his loyal whip, and you know, there's I think a group in caucus that just want to get the work done and are tired of the distractions. But when you got Sturko on one side, and then you know the people towards
Well,
the
and can they contain, I mean, again, going back to Polyev and what he's managed to do thus far, even though, I mean, he's not governing, but like, can they contain, even if they manage to get that together? Because I agree, there's a group that wants to govern. Um, but is there enough of the people on the fringes that will still, just based on the electoral math, I mean, we could talk about this with the sort of new activisty green side as well for the NDP. But you know, how many, Mike, I go to you, how many ridings in this province were, you know, a point or two in one direction or the other that could shift by having you know, a right wing or left wing candidate in a you know, a heavily contested riding. And there's four parties in the three parties in the legislature right now. There's a Centre BC as
four right
well, I
now.
think 3, 4,
There's
some
four in the
independents.
legislature. Yeah. Greens and one BC.
You know, good thing we didn't bring in proportional representation and have all the proliferation
Yeah,
of
wouldn't want
small
that.
parties. But
Well,
so
you know, the
I'm just saying,
Conservatives
like,
still have a pretty good map right now. Like you'd be hard pressed to say where are the Conservatives going to lose a seat. You know, like especially on an issue like oil pipelines, there's not many seats that are going to go against the Conservatives because they're taking a position in favor of the oil pipeline.
Well, but
Because all the seats they don't hold are like in Vancouver and the South Island, and the Fraser Valley's probably okay with it. The interior is definitely okay with it.
Well, it
So
depends what EB's position finally is, because Mario Conseco of Research Co just did a poll this week that showed the Conservatives are declining, undoubtedly.
they
in his
also
mind.
Mario Conseco's poll also shows the NDP ahead in the southern interior, and I don't buy it. But you know, I think it's close still. You know, I don't think a lot's changed since the last election. And if you did swap out Rustad, whose numbers aren't great, with potentially a more popular leader, then that could be problematic for the NDP. But there is a
I mean, I
lot
also
more
think the
politics to
federal,
go here before the next election. So
and I think the federal scene matters as well. Like I've said before, I think that Rustad benefited more from Poilievre's rise than Poilievre ended up benefiting. In terms of the strength of the Conservative brand at the time of the BC election, you know, sort of at the height before, and so depending on how things go with Carney and you know, there's a sort of time limit there in regards to Canadians' frustrations and whether Poilievre's sort of able to hang on and just because I think in many ways it's the brand, you know, the Conservative brand as an alternative to David Eby ends up being more relevant to voters than you know, Rustad sort of interrupts that rather than aids it. But I do think that that's still I agree people are looking for an alternative to David Eby on a number of fronts. But if it's not there, you know, he'll get to continue to kind of stumble through the various landmines that exist.
well,
Which we've hardly spent any time on.
I know.
all
There's
this
so many.
talk is
We haven't
making me
even talked about
thirsty.
the strike or the upcoming
Yeah.
NDP convention.
Well, yeah, the
You know,
longest public
Yeah.
service strike in BC history continues with a huge demonstration outside the legislature when it opened. Of
Okay,
course,
well, I'm going to go on
they
strike
all
for the
worked out.
minibar here. So let's head there. Pearl, do you want to raise a glass, raise some catnip, or take a
the
shot, Pearl?
crows. She's watching crows
Okay.
outside in the alley.
What about you, Maria? Do you have
Yeah, well,
raise a
I'm going
glass or
to
take a
we
shot?
haven't talked about the federal NDP because why would we? But I'm going to actually raise a glass to one of the leadership candidates in the federal NDP, Rob Ashton, who announced last week he's president of the Longshoremen. And you know, I'm not endorsing him. I don't know if he has the professional disciplined team that will be required to run an effective national campaign. But I could tell you a lot of people are excited, including myself, just to hear a really like clear working class message in the NDP conversation. You know, he's literally said he's there to kick ass for the working class. So I think that that's a nice addition to a conversation, you know, that we'll see with Heather McPherson and the NDP MP in Alberta, and then Avi Lewis who's based here in BC, but I still think of as a Toronto person. And pipelines will likely dominate that conversation to some degree as well. But Rob Ashton and bringing some working class politics back to New Democrat politics, I'm going to raise my glass to him.
Rob Ashton, if you are listening, you are welcome to come to Hotel Pacifico. So please be in touch.
Well,
I think he'd be a good
there's
guest, actually, Geoff.
three BC, yeah.
He's the guy you want to have a beer with, apparently. So,
Well, especially if there's some salty longshore language, we'd like that. So,
Well, I think an Indigenous leader from the Central Vancouver Islander is going to announce today, if she hasn't already. Her name is on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember.
For the federal
She would be
NDP
the
leadership?
third. Yeah, she would be the third leadership candidate from BC. Ivy Lewis, Rob Ashton, and her.
very, very Western focused leadership
Yeah.
race. Not a lot of fluent French.
I don't
from
believe
what I
there's ever been
understand.
a British Columbian lead the federal NDP, has there?
Mm,
I mean, Tommy
Well-
Douglas represented a BCC, but he wasn't a British Columbian, I would argue.
Yeah, true.
So,
Yeah, that's right.
sorry about that ancient political
Oh, for your
history
guys'
there.
ancient
Oh,
BC
yeah.
history.
Come
No,
on,
I was
back.
trying to think of.
Take a
Settle
shot at
down, Mike.
myself.
Settle down. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take a shot at Mark Carney because we had our elbows up. I don't think we've really jabbed anybody too hard yet. Prime Minister's off to see Trump again. The fact that he keeps rushing down to Washington does not make me feel great. I don't know what our bottom line is here. I think the Canadians are entitled to know whether there's certain red lines that we won't cross. We want to be under the Golden Dome, or we're going to integrate our defense strategy with the United States. Are we a country then if we have an integrated defense strategy with the United States? I'm not sure. We're going to continue to buy the F-35s, which we're kind of locked into, but that's a second question. Clearly, Trump wants to, and we're basing this on comments made by a very senior associate of the Trump team named Kelly Craft, I think her name was. She was in the Globe and
Former
Mail on the
ambassador.
weekend, saying, listen, you're going to have to align with our foreign policy. You're going to have to align with our defense policy. You're going to have to stop trying to promote Chinese goods coming into the United States, which is something I didn't think we were doing. And if she's right, then 51st statehood is on the horizon, maybe not even full statehood, but something like a protectorate. And I think that when we went into the free trade talks, we were not going to allow our cultural institutions to go there. Supply management was not going to be touched. We were going to have our own foreign policy. Obviously, that was never in doubt. And I'm increasingly anxious. So my shot at Mark Carney is, would you please tell Canadians what the bottom lines are and what kind of outcome we're looking for down the road as a victory, and what we will keep fighting unless we get. And I'm increasingly anxious about that. So there's just my appeal to the Prime Minister. Tell us what's up.
I think Geoff might be running for the federal NDP leadership after hearing that speech.
I'm too obsessed with ancient BC history.
Fair enough.
So you guys in
we
your
have
ancient
our
BC
priorities
history.
straight. Through the course of this episode, I've developed two shots I'm going to take because I didn't know what I was doing when I started this. First of all, I'm going to take a shot at Russian ancient history. I believe the prevalence of czars in British Columbia is getting a bit much. Look, and fast tracks. It's because if you need czars and you need fast tracks, it means your own system doesn't work. Okay?
That it isn't shovel ready after
If
all.
we need Larry Campbell to come in, you give him raise a glass. I'm sure he wants to help, great. But we shouldn't need Larry Campbell. We should just have a system that figures it out and works. And that takes leadership from the cabinet table, leadership from deputy ministers or the mayor, or whatever. Somebody's just got to step up and do it. You can't just hire a czar, rent a czar. And then what's the latest czar? Oh, Bob Rennie wants a czar for real estate, reflecting the frustration that's there in the real estate community, like in municipalities and the Byzantine structure we have in Metro Vancouver. And it's like, fix it. Everybody, fix it. You don't need a czar. Just fix it. Okay, that's my little speech on czars. My second shot is directed at political staff members who tweet out things that are not in the message box for the organization they are working for, and then are surprised they get fired.
Yeah.
And that's happened twice with the Conservatives, and it's not unique to the Conservatives. It happens with the NDP. It happens with Liberals. It's like, if you are going to go work in political staff, check your social media account at the door, unless you are retweeting your own caucus who are supposed to be on message. So it's like, don't become part of the story. If you want to become part of the story, run for office. Don't make yourself part of the story when you're working for that organization and giving the leader a headache.
You will get canceled.
will
McDonald
get
upholds
canceled.
cancel culture.
And then don't go play the
Gag
victim.
order.
Don't go play
Crushing
the
free
victim.
speech. It's the end
You
of free
don't
speech
get
right
free
there. Mike
speech when
McDonald.
you are a staff member.
Yeah.
So,
Terminated with
agree.
exceeding prejudice. Yeah.
so there you go. And that's our episode for today. Thanks to Maria Dobrinskaya for dropping by Hotel Pacifico and Rod Mickleburgh. And good luck on the launch of the John Horgan book this week. And thanks to our sponsors for allowing us to air this episode to you for free. BC, you can never leave.